If your church teaches sola scriptura, it's likely not from Christ and definitely not apostolic. Let me explain. The first thing we want to understand is how the church existed in the first century, how it operated. We know that the first New Testament book written was likely First Thessalonians, and that wasn't written for 20 to 30 years after Jesus Christ ascended into heaven. They relied on eyewitness testimony, and they relied on the teaching of the church to give them specific revelation about Jesus Christ. Of course, they had the Old Testament and they had those messianic prophecies, but there wasn't a defined canon then. And not only that, how did the average Christian really come to understand that this man from Galilee fulfilled these prophecies? And that's where the teaching of the church and the magisterium comes in. And so, because eyewitness testimony and the magisterium were already established before the first book of the New Testament was written, instead of the New Testament creating this tradition or creating this eyewitness testimony, the New Testament enters into the context of what the church already taught and eyewitness testimony. And so when a church believes in sola scriptura, it greatly diminishes, it greatly depreciates 60% of what the church relied upon before New Testament scripture was written. And by the way, there's nothing in the New Testament that even suggests that this arrangement that the church had with its teaching, its tradition, and its scripture would ever change. There's no hint of that. But still yet, 2,000 years later, we see Protestants almost entirely reject church history. I know not all Protestants do, but at the very least, its role is greatly diminished. Now, why do Protestants and especially evangelicals have to diminish the role of tradition, of magisterium, when it comes to their epistemology? This is because what they teach and what they believe and their history is not in line with it. Not just because it disagrees with their theology, but also because they don't have their own tradition that extends back to Christ. So this is what you would expect from a group who comes 1,500, 1,800 years later and just hijacks Christianity. You would expect no continuity historically and for them to reject the authority of the church that's been established for the entirety of the Christian faith. Anyways, God bless.